All right. We have Sheila Kennedy and Andrea Martin with us. And with that, I'm going to put myself on mute. Sheila, I think you have gathered information or have broken down this 1,000 page document. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, and I'm going to be as brief as one can be when you're dealing with 1,000 page piece of, let's just say, not a big, beautiful bill, no matter what they want to call it. As Heather Cox Richardson has said, the Republicans' big, beautiful bill is MAGA's attempt to replace the government that we've had since the 1930s with one that reflects the goals of Project 2025. It's also, at essence, an effort to rob the poor in order to further enrich the wealthy. The bill is, as you've heard, 1,000 plus pages. And so tonight I'm just going to highlight the major elements and alert you to the fact that despite the fact that this is billed as a budget, it has lots and lots of damaging non-fiscal provisions, which should be ruled non-germane in the Senate and eliminated, but probably won't be. Before getting to the truly horrifying fiscal mischief, excuse me, let me just share with you some of the most egregious non-fiscal provisions. There's a measure to cripple the courts by prohibiting any funding from being used to carry out court orders holding executive branch officials in contempt. Now, of course, passage of that measure would enable Trump and his officials to simply defy court orders at will. Uh, there's an addition of billions of dollars to various parts of Trump's deportation efforts, ramping up those efforts to the tune of an additional $1 trillion overall. That trillion includes 45 billion to construct new immigration jails, which is more than 13 times ICE's current detention budget. In addition, it would allow for the indefinite detention of immigrant children, and it would charge families $3,500 to reunite with a child who arrived alone at the border. Asylum seekers would be charged an application fee of at least $1,000 because you wouldn't want to be nice to people seeking asylum. The administration would be given authority to label nonprofits as terrorist supporting organizations and terminate their tax status, which, of course, is an open invitation to suppress the free speech and activism of climate and civil liberties organizations, especially, but many others, of which Trump and MAGA disapprove. The bill would eliminate the National Weather Service. I don't know why, making local weather reports far less accurate at a time when damaging weather events are more and more likely. One other provision would allow the administration to just sell off our national parks. And a particularly ugly provision repeals the existing $200 excise tax on the sale of gun silencers. Now, silencers have absolutely no lawful purpose. Their only purpose is to conceal shootings. Other bits of fine print more directly support the major goal of the bill, which is, as I've noted, to protect the extremely wealthy against efforts to get them to pay their fair share of taxes. Basically, the bill exempts rich people from paying their dues to the country that made their accumulation of wealth possible. Just to give you one example, the bill would basically eliminate what's left of the estate tax. And of course, that tax has already been honed down to be massively favorable to the top 1%. But the guts of the bill, as I said, are the fiscal provisions. Basically, the bill is an effort to fund the extension of Trump's tax cuts for the rich by eliminating health care for the poor and middle class. The Congressional Budget Office has estimated that as many as 16 million people would lose health insurance under the House-passed version of the bill. And today, the media came out reporting that the Senate committee has moved to make those cuts even more draconian. The annual cuts to Medicaid would average over $70 billion a year, which is the same amount millionaires and billionaires would gain in tax cuts. The media has focused on those Medicaid cuts, but a number of analysts have explained that measures that are currently being minimized as just technical revisions would essentially operate to repeal Obamacare as well. Not only would millions of individuals lose their health insurance, those cuts would cause the closure of many, if not most, rural hospitals and would have a dramatically negative impact on local economies. Ironically, mostly in red states like Indiana. Economists estimate that the depressed local spending under the House version of the bill would force the loss of 850,000 jobs. Healthcare, in case you didn't know, is the largest employer of any sector of our economy. It employs 18 million workers. Now, the Republicans who claim that they're just adding work requirements to Medicaid are lying. The budget cuts $715 billion from Medicaid and $335 billion from Obamacare, or the Affordable Care Act. And prior experience in states that have tried these work requirements have demonstrated that they do absolutely nothing but erect paperwork barriers that throw eligible people off Medicaid. As we've learned from those prior efforts, virtually every Medicaid recipient who's able to work is already working. Most Medicaid recipients are either disabled, elderly, or children. There's a lot more. The bill weakens the child tax credit by lowering the eligibility income threshold, so millions of children will suddenly become ineligible. It expands school vouchers, which continues the GOP effort to destroy public education and shift tax dollars to religious institutions in violation of the First Amendment. It includes a wide variety of what I call stealth cuts to the Affordable Care Act that will increase out-of-pocket costs and make insurance more expensive for the few people who are fortunate enough to retain it. And if the assault on poor people wasn't mean-spirited enough, the bill also has deep cuts to SNAP. The House-passed version would cut nearly $300 billion from SNAP, which SNAP, as you know, is the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. According to CBO estimates, that would be by far the largest cut to SNAP in history. And it would mean that millions of low-income people would lose some or all of the food assistance they need to be able to afford groceries and feed their children. SNAP has been the nation's most effective anti-hunger program, and the bill cuts it by roughly 30%. Those cuts, by the way, are actually deeper than the $230 billion in cuts that the original budget resolution called for. And that's because the bill adds tens of billions of dollars in new spending for farm programs, but it pays for those dollars by taking more food assistance away from people who need it, people with low incomes. And despite the GOP's purported concerns about budget deficits, the bill, if it passed in anything like its current form, would blow up the budget deficit. According to the Congressional Budget Office, this bill would increase borrowing by a total of $2.4 trillion by 2034, because the $1.3 trillion in cuts to Medicaid, food stamps, and other programs doesn't even come close to canceling out the $3.7 trillion in tax cuts for rich people. Just the tax cuts going to the richest 5% outstripped the cuts to Medicaid and food stamps by $300 billion. And once you add in interest costs on that borrowing, the total debt the bill creates is over $3 trillion. To sum up, this is just a horrible, horrible bill, and it needs to be defeated. I'm done.
Thank you for sharing that breakdown with us, Sheila. And I've had some people ask if we can send it to them in our follow-up email, and we will. Andrea, what can we do? What can Hoosiers do, those that are on this call and as they share with family and friends who are like-minded, what can we do with respect to what is on the table now in the Senate?
Well, first, good evening, everyone. It is really a pleasure to be with so many people who are so concerned right now. And that concern is the first step of doing and getting things done. Indivisible Central Indiana, you have done an amazing job considering how relatively young you are. You've done a great job. Sheila's gone over some of the horrors of the big, bad, ugly bill, but I just have to say it's interesting to me that the guy who tried to change a hurricane forecast with a Sharpie and then slashed the budget and fired NOAA and Weather Service employees, it's really interesting to me that he was surprised when his big parade got rained on. And I think if we all keep working together, he's going to get some more surprises, some people-powered surprises, because there are things that we can do together that will make a difference. I really love the organization's commitment to nonviolence, which is embedded in your core, your belief that organized people power can overcome hate. Um, we can't lose sight of that because when you start having policy debates or discussions, it's so easy to start yelling at people and having arguments. And when you can just communicate respectfully, listen with respect, and try to keep your eyeball rolling to a minimum, it goes a long way. And I think if we are working together, we really can make a difference. But it does not happen overnight. We've got to act strategically. And when we do that, we can make changes. And I think I'm a child of the civil rights movement, and I integrated a few schools in my younger days. So I think a lot about the long civil rights marches, physically how long they marched, from Anniston to Selma. Those were not glamorous protests. Those were long slogs. The boycotts, the sit-ins, the Montgomery boycott, bus boycott started December 5th, 1955 and didn't end until December 20th, 1965.
Wow.
I'm sorry, 56. I transposed my numbers. 381 days. 381 days of doing something that may have felt mundane, that was certainly inconvenient for people who needed to go to work and didn't take the bus. They tried to carpool. I mean, it was a organized effort of small actions. And I think that's what Indivisible specializes in. So I'm using this as an example. Um, but I also want you to think about the lunch counter protests, the lunch counter sit-ins to desegregate lunch counters and soda counters. Think about what those young students, many of them were young college students, did over and over and over and over. They went in, they sat down at counters, knowing they were not going to get a soda or a sandwich. Sometimes they sat for hours before they finally got hauled off and arrested. And then they got released, and then they came back another day, and they kept going. They kept going back, and they let their actions speak louder than the words and the ugly words that were thrown at them. And eventually, changes happened across towns. across the country and eventually in Washington when we change the law. So what we do, what you do, it really does matter. Um, Martha asked me to talk a little bit about what you can do to move your members of Congress. And I've got a little bit of experience at that, working with a lot of members of Congress. And the easiest thing you can do is pick up the phone and call your office and let them know you have an opinion. You don't have to make it long. You can just keep it relatively short. My name is Donna. My name is Susan. I'm from Indianapolis, and I think this is a horrible bill, and I want the congressman to vote against it. Go into more details if you'd like, but keep in mind someone like me or an intern is trying to jot down what you're saying, either in a keyboard or on a notepad. So don't get uh, too long-winded with what your recommendation is for the congressman, but keep calling. And it doesn't have to be one call with a shopping list. It can be whatever the bill of the day is on the floor or the bill that's being marked up. We actually keep track of all the calls that come into our office. And especially if the congressman is undecided or is trying to assess which is a better option, which is a worse option, what are the calls saying? And that's helpful to him. If you have a whole lot you want to say, write it down. Send us the email. Go to our website. Um, and I believe just about every member of Congress's website, if you go to house.gov, um, you can look up your member by their name and you'll be taken to their website and you can click and leave a message. I'm actually putting that in the chat, house.gov. And you can, if you've got a longer message or if you've got, background information, links to an article that you want the staff or the member to know about, you can always send us an email. You can send letters. Postcards. Postcards are fun. Sort of like a quick phone call because they're short and you can tell real quick, yay or nay. Um,
Andrea, can I just jump in real quick?
yes.
The things that we encourage people to do is to also use the Five Calls app.
Hmm.
It provides context, longer context around what is going on with a particular situation, a bill, an appointment, and then there's a short script, and the phone numbers of your members of Congress are there, and you can literally just click on that.
Yes.
And then there's a message. So I just wanted to share that with our attendees tonight as well.
It's a very versatile and useful app. I will caution you that I've been on the receiving end of some of those calls that didn't go well because the person using it wasn't familiar with it or got volunteered to make a call, but they really weren't well prepped. And too often we get calls. God bless, some people will go, they just told me to call. I don't know why I'm calling. And it kind of it undermines. So it's great if you're on point. But however you make the call through an app or just call the Capitol Hill switchboard, um, it works. Um, there are other things that you can do as a group or as a group of friends, which is a letter to the editor, um, or posting hopefully constructive comments on your members' websites, on their social media feeds. Um, Sometimes the bots seem to overtake our social media and it's just cranky, cranky. So, it might be nice to have a real person who's really from Indianapolis go, thank you for that vote, or really disappointed in that vote, Senator, depending on what the vote is. Um, but writing op-eds is a great thing to do to your local paper, to your favorite magazines that are following issues that are important to you. We've got the Daily Mirror the Indie Recorder, maybe the Indie Star, the Indiana Capitol Chronicle. They follow political developments very closely. So anytime you write into them, the odds are pretty good that they'll run your letter or your comment. But again, social, not just your social media post, but potential comments can be helpful. There's something else I'd like to suggest, and that is phone calls or emails. Yes, voicemails are listened to. It takes a minute. And who is a real person? We don't have we don't have artificial staff or bots. We really do have staffers that listen to the voicemail overnight. Like I said, it takes a while if we get 20 or 40 voicemails overnight to jot them down. We log them and they're chronicled. 60 people called yay, 20 people called nay. So either one is easy for you, whatever is easy for you, we count them all. And does an actual human carry more weight than voicemail? If it's a real human that's leaving the voicemail message, it counts. It does. Quiet as it's kept. Um, One other thing to think about is how you stay on top of what's going on and how you consume your information or your news. Um, the mainstream media, I grew up listening to Walter Cronkite, and I just wish we had more Walter Cronkites, but the world has changed. So be mindful and intentional in your news sources and mix it up. Uh, Mix it up so you're listening to a variety of maybe a couple of local radio shows with maybe a national show that blends different viewpoints. So some of the emerging media like Midas Touch Network, or my newfound favorite is Substack. I'm really crushing on Substack right now because there's so many mainstream media refugees that are able to really post and write uh, truth to power without feeling that their editor is going to like rip out their words if they don't get the words exactly right. A couple of my favorites, The Contrarian, I know Martha's fond of them. Camp Contraband is one of my favorites. Democracy Docket, Heather Cox Richardson that Sheila quoted. Um, just be expansive in your intake of information. Nothing wrong with going to the mainstream media, but don't rely solely on them, whether it's print or radio um, or television. I guess I can't call it television now. Filmed communication. But the last thing I want to mention, I think, is one of the most important ways that you can move your members of Congress is to meet with them, to physically or virtually meet with them so you're face to face. And a lot of folks will talk about, oh, we're going to travel to Washington and take a big group to Washington. That's great if you've got a lot of discretionary income or discretionary time. I recommend meet local, meet in the local district office of your representatives, all the ones in the state, and your senators. The benefit of meeting in the local or the district offices is that you don't have the schedule challenges like floor votes or committee markups that members don't have any control over, and they got to dash when the bells start to ring on the floor. But when you meet locally, you have a chance to collect your A list of advocates, and you can drive across town or maybe across the county line, depending on who you want to go visit. As long as you have at least one constituent with you who is in the congressional district, You've got entree to that congressional office. And if you want to take a backup person or a couple of people that may not technically be in a congressional district, as long as you have one or two, that's good. For senators, anybody from the state counts. And I encourage you guys to do this, whether the member, the senator is available or not. Meet with the staff, insist on meetings, email the requests, but don't let them blow you off. Even if they are adamantly opposed, that's all the more reason to meet with them and try to educate them and turn them around, or at least mitigate some of what their initial views are. It's going to be interesting to see what happens in the Senate with this reconciliation bill with Medicaid, which is really the way the bill's written, is an unpaid mandate to the states. Says the majority that used to be very anti-unfunded mandates to the states. We've met with a few folks from the state not governor association, the Association of State Legislators. They had meetings in Washington, and they were really clear. The reconciliation bill shifts the ratio of funding from 100% to 80%, and shoves that off on the state. And most states don't have the funding just laying around for it. That means what Sheila said, people are going to get kicked off. So how the senators determine how big a wallop on their states will give you as advocates a chance to lay out a perspective from ideological purity, cut, to pragmatic, responsible representation. You represent us. This is how this is going to impact us. People with disabilities on Medicaid, it's crazy. So schedule the meetings in the district office, bring folks with you, fellow advocates, coworkers, neighbors, family members, and just know that you're important because you're a constituent, and the more you come in and meet with folks, the better. And if there's commentary after the meeting that, you post somewhere expressing your disappointment with the position and you hope that position changes, that's not necessarily bad. And I think I'll stop there and let Martha drive the car for a bit.
Thank you all so much for your questions. There's some great questions in the chat. I'm going to try to group them together, but may not be completely possible. So one of the questions is, I think we're all interested in, when is this bill going to be voted on in the Senate?
Well, I would defer to Andrea.
Yeah,
We're talking about doing it by the 4th of July.
the goal has been stated, the 4th of July. I don't know if that's really going to happen. It's an arbitrary imposed deadline. And the more they work on it, the farther apart they seem to be in the Senate. So anybody's guess is as good as mine, but their announced goal is by the 4th of July.
Okay. And when people do call in, is it better to vote? Another question is it please vote against the big, beautiful bill, or ask them to vote against the reconciliation bill? And is it kind of a follow-up? Should you oppose when you call in? Should you speak about specific pieces of the bill?
The way the bill was in the House, it was one big, ugly vote. We didn't have a chance. They rejected the amendment. So it was a up or down vote in the House. The Senate's a little different. They may allow separate parts of the bill to get separate votes. That remains to be seen. I think the easiest messaging at this point is please oppose this bill. It's bad. And if there's a particular part that is most bad to you, talk about that section. Whether it's Medicaid, whether it's cuts to science or taken off the tax for tanning beds. I mean, there are actually some tanning beds in Indiana. So maybe there are a few people that think that's a great idea. But yeah, mention the thing that is most egregious. But so a sort of a two-part. Please vote against the bill, especially the blah blah part.
Okay, that's super helpful. And then another question, kind of a couple of questions, but how do we see like a summary of what's going on? What are the changes that the Senate is making? And
Yeah.
a follow-up, which has not been asked, but I think that this could be very helpful, is what happens after they vote?
Well, that's a very good question. Um, the Senate Congress.gov, and I'll type this real quick. One of my favorite websites. Congress.gov will allow you to pull up a bill number and it will give you the status of the bill. And if amendments are offered to it, it will list the amendments and will give you the status of the bill. Um, there's also a feature on the Senate website, I can't recall it off the top of my head, that allows you to watch live legislative action on the floor. And in the House, our site allows you to actually see written out what the procedural steps are. So debating Bill HR 4 began 40 minutes of debate. Now debating, two amendments, vote on passage. If you're not able to keep C-SPAN on all the time, and I hope most of you aren't, I hope most of you have exciting, thrilling lives and you're doing other stuff. But if you want to check in throughout a long debate, those websites will help you do that. And remind me, the second question was,
What happens after they vote on it?
ah, if the Senate does not pass exactly what the House passed, and I'm thinking that's not going to happen, then we're going to have to either have a conference committee or something we've done more in recent years. Instead of conference committees, it's ping ponging. The Senate adds the stuff they want, and then they send it back to the House and attempt to shove it down the House's throat. Depending on who's in the majority, who's in the minority, you might go, yay, or you may go, no way. I'm thinking, as someone that works for Mr. Carson, it's hard to imagine the Senate making this bill any worse than it is. But if
That's saying something.
it really is, it really is. But if the Senate uh, changes the bill more than a technical correction or two, it's got to come back to the House. And the House is full of 435 very individual boys and girls. And many have already said that if the Senate changes it, they will vote against it. And that dynamic makes it that much harder to get done by July 4th.
Sure.
And I'll speculate, the longer this drags out, the harder it is to push it across the finish line, the raggedier it gets, and it ceases to be big and beautiful. It just becomes raggedy and stinky, in my opinion.
There was also a report today that polling has shown that Americans are against this bill 2-1. So I'd like Andrea's explanation of, do they care anymore? I mean,
Great question.
how
That's a
important
really good
is it?
question. What is it?
How important to the Republicans who are just in lockstep with whatever Trump wants? Do any of them really care that their constituents don't want this?
I don't know. I wondered often because at some point, I won't name names. I'll just say at some point, whoever the president is, he will not be on the ballot when a senator is on the ballot. at some point you're going to be on the ballot on your own. And if you've really stepped in it and you really stepped in the mud hole, your constituents are going to remember that. But I fear that there is fear
Mhm.
at play now. And while people who not that long ago were concerned about what their constituents thought and whether their constituents might toss them to the curb, um, I really think some people are more afraid of what this current leader is going to do to them. Honestly, I mean, I've heard a couple of friends who maybe are too into conspiracy theories and have watched the, Manchurian Candidate and
Yes, I
stuff.
know.
Yeah, but
Okay.
it makes you wonder if things are being held over people's heads that are forcing just bad decisions.
Um, Gosh, this is great. These questions are really good. Another one that came in, I feel like I'm on a talk show. Um,
You are.
yeah, can the Senate filibuster the bill?
Good question. I was going to try to type that in the chat, but then uh, somebody asked another question. This bill has been structured through a reconciliation process so that procedurally it avoids a filibuster.
Mhm.
It only needs to be passed by a simple majority in the Senate. It's not filibustered. So unless they reconfigure it, then this particular bill is not filibusterable. Good question.
Let's see. I'm gonna go up to the top because there were some good questions that came in. Oh my goodness. Chat has blown up. Yes, it will be recorded. Yes, we'll send it out. Question, is the Congressional Budget Office estimate is the CBO estimate for the House or the Senate version?
Right now, it is for the House version because the Senate is still penciling theirs in.
Okay. And this might be a Sheila question. Can you go back and to what nonprofits can face under this bill? Did I hear you say that they can be seen as terrorist organizations?
And we all know how precise our president is when he is determining these things. No, the bill, as I understand that provision, would allow the president, for example, to say that the ACLU, in suing him or opposing one of the million things he's doing, is actually a terrorist organization and yank its tax status. Maybe it would be an environmental organization. Anybody, he thinks that windmills kill birds and cause cancer. That would be terrorism, I suppose. Uh, so it would give the authority to the president to simply designate a nonprofit he didn't like as terrorist and yank their tax exempt status, which of course would uh, deprive them of most of their funding.
Hard to believe.
Everything that's been happening is hard to believe. Yeah.
Yeah, that was the truth. Um, Andy, I may have to turn it over to you in a second, but let's see here. Some new messages came up. Um, Says the better question is whether the GOP legislators even care about GOP constituents. With straight party voting, they don't really need to care about any of us. I think we've kind of addressed that. Repeat the numbers of the bills, please. And I think is that HB one?
HR 1 in
HR
the
one.
House. I don't know if it's going to keep that number in the Senate or I don't know. The Senate may break it up and then sew it back together. There's two or three committees that have jurisdiction and they've been negotiating. I don't know if they'll attempt to pass their portions and then sew it back together. I'm not an expert on the Senate.
Okay, thank you for that.
Also, while you're reading, I put the links in the chat for the Senate floor procedure and the CBO score to date.
Thank you for that. Let's see, are emails tracked / tally the same way that calls are? Are they worth sending using the semi-automated online action and advocacy tools, or are emails ignored?
Emails are not ignored. I spend a very large portion of my life helping to make sure they get responded to. They do get responded to, but the ones that are individualized and have a personal message or story are more persuasive than 400 of the exact same message.
Mhm.
We count the volume, but we know what has been generated by a large organized effort. And it's fine because, as I said, we tally how many yeses, how many no. So in that regard, it's they're all important. Calls and emails and letters and postcards, they're all counted. But in terms of letters or notes that we'll hand off to the congressman, sir, you ought to take a look at this. I mean, every now and then he'll go on the floor and say, this is what I heard. So they're all good. There's no such thing as a bad message. They're all important. Whatever is easiest for you, if all you can do is open up the app and click send, do that. They get counted. At least in our office, they get counted. I can't promise all offices, but most offices keep track of the volume of the yeses and the nos.
Yeah, that's what we keep, telling our members,
It's
and
true.
so Charlotte, we've got to keep this up. Okay, here's another one from Carl. Let's see, I see that Senator Young is on the Finance Committee, the Commerce, Science, Transportation Committee, and the Small Business Entrepreneurship Committee. Those all seem very related to this bill. Is he involved in making edits to it?
He could be if the committees are allowed to mark up the bills. Before the reconciliation bill hit the House floor, we had markups in about 8 different committees. Congressman Carson's on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. We had like a 5-hour markup for our provisions of the bill. So Ways and Means, Energy and Commerce, Education and Labor all had different sections of the 1,000 pages. They marked it up.
Oh.
And then the budget committee sewed it together. Then the rules committee took it and completely changed it with the backroom deals. And we were there at 1 o'clock in the morning. It was not pretty. I expect the Senate committees, like the ones that Senator Young is on, should have their opportunity to mark up their provisions of the bill.
Great. Let's see. Is there a way, and I am sure a lot of other people are thinking this too, myself included, is there a way to break this down in simple terms? I mean, and Sheila did I think a wonderful job of doing that, but for those friends and family members that are still supporters of him, how do we relay this information
I
that's understandable?
I would we've heard from a lot of constituents who call and are sort of aghast. They're like, I like the guy. I thought he would do this, but this isn't what I bargained for. This, I didn't think he was going to do this. And even if I like the guy, this is a really bad move. This is a really bad bill. And we got to stop this bad bill. and you kind of, it's a softer approach as opposed to saying he's insert vile word. Don't call him vile word. Just say, this isn't really what he promised you. This isn't what he promised any of the folks that love him. And the folks that love him are having family members deported. They're having their health care slashed. If any of you saw the video, I think Midas Touch had a couple of good highlight reels of the oversight hearing on part of the health provisions of the bill when the disability rights advocates came in and in their wheelchairs started speaking. A couple of people were arrested because they kind of disrupted the hearing, but it was so powerful to see them visualize to people who Medicaid recipients are. And most of them are younger adults with disabilities. And so saying, yeah, I like the guy, but we shouldn't be doing this. We got to stop this. I think that's an approach. Sheila, what do you think?
Wow, you're fucking
I,
fine.
I think the essence of this bill is in order to give very wealthy people an extended tax cut. The bill takes away health care from people who need it, millions of people who need it. I mean, everything else you can go through and do what I did and list the obscenities. But at the base, what it is well, I don't want my friends who are millionaires and billionaires to pay more taxes. So in order to continue their very, very cushy current tax status, we're just going to make sure that what was 16 million people lose their health insurance. I mean, that's the essence of this bill. Everything else is just added obscenity, but
Some of the additional questions have been around speaking more about the Medicare and
Yeah,
Medicaid cuts, excuse me, and Medicare Medicaid and
That was
Medicare
me.
proposed cuts as
Normal
well
to
as Social
ask about that.
Security. Can we ask that you go on mute if you're not speaking? That would be super helpful. So I hope that made sense. So I saw something about 800 million in Medicaid cuts. And I'm so sorry, I'm looking for the question. Well, I'm not, it's pretty far
That's
up here.
800 million in Medicare cuts, not Medicaid, Medicare, and then
Medicare.
800 million.
Okay, thank you,
Then
Donna.
they plug 800 million in DOD. Is that where that money's going?
Thank you, Donna.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, that's great. I was looking for your question. So
I didn't catch the question.
it was about the 800 million in Medicare cut, excuse me. And is
Mhm.
that going to fund DOD?
It could. That DOD is one of the few areas that gets an increase instead of a cut. So it's possible. It's really possible. And with the threat of maybe another war with Iran, it just is, it's very concerning. Very concerning. Um, Martha, can I see one question here that says question for Andrea, if you don't mind?
No, go right ahead if you can.
Judy, I'm glad you agree that Kevin from Crispus Attucks is a rock star. He's wonderful. And I'm really sorry that you've had trouble getting a meeting scheduled with with our new member of the delegation. Don't give in. Send a written request once a week, maybe. Call, follow up. I don't like drop-bys just because if anybody's been in a House office in Washington, you know how small they are. We don't have a separate conference room to meet in the way the senators do. So if we get 4 or 5 people in our lobby area that are not scheduled, it gets really cramped and I don't encourage to just drop by. But I will say that if you have the way you've laid out here, um, requested multiple times for a meeting, and if you have said if the congressman's not available, I'd be happy to meet with his staff, with your legislative director, your district director, your deputy chief of staff, whoever your senior caseworker is, I would like to meet with someone in his office. Um, and if you don't get any headway there, then maybe you do drop by. Um, I I think you just have to be persistent, and at some point, maybe it becomes a social media post.
Yeah.
Maybe it becomes a social media post if you have someone who's really talented at crafting together screenshots of emails where you've requested meetings and
Letter to the editor.
that
Right.
as well. That's a great letter to the editor. And when you do that, then it doesn't have to drag out for a long period of time. You said you've been reaching out since May. It's almost the end of June now. There's so much happening that you want to kind of come in on a timely basis if you can. And I'll give you two sides of the coin, at least for the DC staff. Um, our ability to schedule meetings is really limited in part because we've got floor votes, we've got committee votes. Congressman is on 3 different committees. If he's in one of those committees, there is at least one staffer in there staffing him. That's one less person in the office to take a meeting. And so we beg people sometimes to be patient. This week is not going to work. Can we reschedule something the following week? Um, but what you're describing is sounds like avoidance. And I think you just have to be persistent, politely, professionally, but don't let them blow you off. That's my opinion. Martha, maybe you have on the ground perspective.
Well, no, I think that that's great. I think persistence, one of the things that we did a few weeks ago during recess, although we knew that we wouldn't meet with him directly, was we were very persistent with Senator Young's office, and we actually set up a mobilize to have people sign up for shifts. And
Good.
we're persistent, and we got them to agree. So over the course of 3 days, we had 10 shifts of close to 6 people per shift.
That's awesome.
And there was a lot of note taking on their behalf. And we sent a recap email to the staffers that we had, collectively met with.
Yeah.
And I think people felt good doing that. I think that we'd like to do that again. I don't know when that will be exactly, but kind of look out in the indivisible emails because we will post that in there. Anytime there are action items, we will do that. I think that was very meaningful for people to be able to speak directly with the staff and also to hear what others had to say. And I think it was important for the staff to hear, face
Yeah,
to face.
and this is Andy, Martha. I'd like to chime in on that Todd Young office visit a little bit more. I was for Indivisible. I took the lead on making the contacts with the senator's office and trying to set something up. And I'm not saying this just to badmouth somebody, but this is important for folks to know in general that we tried to schedule meetings with him or with his office here in Indianapolis. And basically, we're getting kind of ignored, just kind of put off. The sense I got was that they were hoping that if we, if they just ignored us long enough, we would give up and go away. Um, what turned the tide and got them to be willing to meet with us was our very polite threatening of going to the media and telling them, the media, that the senator was not, the senator's office was not willing to meet with his constituents. I sent that email over to their office, and almost immediately I started getting phone calls from his office saying, "Hey, we can work with you. Let's get something set up." So that's oftentimes, or I don't know, oftentimes that's what it took that time. And it may very well take that kind of persistence, that kind of, pressure, to get something done, to get your voice heard.
Yeah, I think that's that strategic part of the strategic action. That was well done.
Yeah, I think it went well. Again, I think we will do it again. They need to hear from us. They're elected officials. That was our message. Oh, and this was my third or fourth visit to his office. And he's an elected official. He needs to listen to his constituents.
Yeah.
Um,
And
gosh,
the other thing, I'm just going to say this, you don't want to burn bridges with these offices because there may be 90% of things that you are adamantly opposed to. And I was looking at the message somewhere in the chat about getting the propaganda letters from some of these offices.
yes.
Um, and I'm on a few of their email lists as well, and they really are propaganda letters. But there will be a time, I hope, where there's maybe 5% of something that they'll do the right thing on. And so you don't want to completely burn the bridge. You want to keep a line of communication open. Someone asked in the chat if we've got lines of communication with the Senate offices, and it's not as warm and fuzzy as with some other colleagues, but we kind of bend over backwards to leave some type of open communication. And there are a handful of issues that we have shared kind of Indiana priorities that we can, sign a letter or a bill together on. It's a small uh, percentage, but you don't want to completely burn the bridge if you don't have to um, for some of these offices. You just have to be persistent and keep working with them. And maybe at some point you're able to shame them like, is this really the thing you think we ought to do?
I would say somebody just posted, and I'm going to reiterate, Congressman Carson's office is, I don't think I've ever had to leave a voicemail, ever. Maybe once. It's the only office.
Sometimes the phones all ring at once, and yet every now and then they do go
Right,
to
but I just want to,
voicemail.
kudos to your staff. We are up at 8 o'clock, which is the official end of the meeting. I just want to say thank you so much to both you, Andrea, and you, Sheila, for taking the time out and answering, to providing some context around the bill, and answering what are some really heartfelt questions. I think we're all feeling them about what's going on right now with the bill. So that we will send the recording out. We will do our very best to provide a synopsis of what we've talked about tonight. And keep up the good work, everybody, because 2026 is right around the corner.
Not soon enough.
Not soon enough. Exactly.
Thank you, everybody. I enjoyed it.
Thank you so much.